thank you guys so much for being here. Really excited to have Aaron Haynes and Dave Loomis, and we're going to talk voice a customer. Was that Craig? Not really a question, but I think if I suggested we need to interview our customers to exec management, I would get laughed out of the room. All right, we should talk about navigating that. Actually, we should definitely talk about navigating that. All right, so first, who are we? Well, first, we're Gorilla 76, and we help B2B manufacturers generate new business through marketing. Aaron Haynes are you senior product marketing segment manager now for Firetrace? What is your title now?
It is, right now, today, it's senior product manager.
Are you a senior product manager for Firetrace? Some of you guys know MJ, who just recently left Firetrace, and Aaron's also another all-star member of the marketing team at Firetrace. And before that, I worked with Aaron at Abacore Binzel, and before that, Aaron worked at Manitou, or after that, he worked at Manitou, and before that, he worked at JLG, the Scissor Lips company. So Aaron's executed VOC at a really high level across 3 organizations, really knows what he's doing and really knows how to execute it on an in-house role. And then we have Dave Loomis, who is the founder of Loomis Marketing. And Dave Loomis basically is the consultant on voice of customer for organizations of all kinds. Dave recently also released a book called Everything is Marketing. That's what the book was titled, right, Dave? Yes.
Marketing is everything we do.
Yeah, marketing is everything we do. I would highly recommend picking that book up. It's available on Amazon, I believe, among other places. And so Dave's owner of Loomis Marketing. They're dedicated to helping people and companies grow, specialize in VOC and digital transformation for B2B brands. All right, so let me get right into the meat of this. So we're going to first cover what is voice of customer, because it's not just interviewing your customers and then taking actions. Like voice of customer is much more programmatic in nature. And so I want to get into sort of like, we'll get into ownership and its sort of genesis and what it is and sort of the qualitative and quantitative aspects of it, collection methodology. How do you choose a method? Because like maybe you're a small company and you can't do a big expansive program, and that's actually okay. Latent needs. Then we'll get into the 7 Ps. And especially I'll get into how voice of customer drives comms. You'll probably have heard some of those points from me before, but we will get into it. So, I'm more here to just moderate and ask incisive, inquisitive questions. These are the VOC experts right here. So with that, Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to get you get started here. You just tell me when you need me to go to the next slide, and then let's just chat on VOC, man. I mean, just I want you guys to just break it down for the people here. Guys who are here on this webinar, questions. Please, if y'all have any questions about what you're seeing here, or just have some more general questions about getting a voice of customer program up there at your company, drop them. We want to answer them, okay? All right, Aaron, it's all you, man. Go for it.
Appreciate it. And happy to be here, especially with you two gentlemen who I've had an opportunity to work with. This is a very busy slide, tons of words on it. And what you see is with a quick Google search, you can uncover a lot of different definitions of what voice of customer is. Out of all of these, I think the one that mirrors my own personal perspective on what VOC is the bottom one, collecting customer feedback, analyzing it, and distributing those insights throughout your organization to generate financial benefits. I think the analyzing and distribution perspective of that definition are vital. Customer feedback is, I think, often misconstrued as being the same thing as voice of customer. And to the point we were making earlier, feedback is, hey, a customer said something to a sales guy on a sales call, and then they may tell someone else in the organization. That's feedback. Voice of customer is considerably more systematic and more structured. So, and when you're conducting voice of customer, you're actually aiming to learn something specific. Feedback comes in randomly, and it doesn't necessarily drive you anywhere specifically. It's just a comment here and there. And the other piece of it is, that term insights.
Yeah.
And Dave, I know you have a very specific definition of insights that I learned from you several years ago and haven't forgotten. So you want to share with the people?
The best things in life are borrowed. And so, I got this definition from a guy named Liam Fahey. He is associated with a lot of great organizations and is a consultant himself, but also I heard it at the Institute for the Study of Business Markets, the ISBM, out of Penn State. So great organization if people don't know about it.
Fantastic organization.
They're a wealth of knowledge also. But one of the things that I've met this Liam Fahey and talked to him about this term insights, which he's wrote an entire book about insights, what they are. But he talked about it being a new understanding of something. So a new understanding of something that will actually make a difference. And I've got a little cheat sheet here, but because I don't remember all 7 points off the top of my head, but he explained, he says that insights explain something that we didn't know before, that they're initially hidden and so not obvious. They involve judgments. They're actually not about facts, which is really interesting. So this goes to what Aaron said about analysis and interpretation. They're novel. In other words, they tend to be counterintuitive. They're about the future, not the past. They usually come from small data, not big data. So that makes it actually harder to find. They can be like needles in haystack. And they often require mindset shift. I don't know if anybody's ever read the book Think and Grow Rich. It's almost like 90 years old, something like that. But this is the idea that like somewhere out here, the amazing ideas or different ways to do things. We've got to, with intention, speak with our customers, hear what is on their mind about the outcomes they're looking for, and then interpret those and be creative and think about, well, let's think about how can we serve them better.
I want to focus on that word you said, intention. With intention, speak to our customers, because I feel like a lot of the customer feedback that, speak to your point, Aaron, it's random. It just it randomly comes through this extemporaneous conversation, and there's no intention really behind how you collect feedback from your customer. And so I think that really comes in the preparation of it, right? Like, how do we even prepare our organization to get insights that are, insightful, and then also we can take action from. And so I kind of want both of you to speak to that a little bit. If it's later on in the presentation, we can get to that. But I'm really interested in knowing sort of even preparing to get a program like this off the ground, what it would look like and how to do that. Do you guys want to answer that question now, or do you want to just go to the next slide and pick it up?
It's probably going to come out, I'm guessing.
Good. Yeah. All right. So let me, I know you put this up here, Aaron, because you wanted to like define and the genesis of what voice of customer is, because I think it's a term that gets thrown around. I don't think anyone really knows quite where it comes from. And I know you kind of have the source here. So go on, please, by all means.
Yeah. So I took a course on voice of customer back in 2014 with American Marketing Science. And I was introduced to Abby Griffin. She co-authored a paper in Marketing Science in '93 with John Hauser called The Voice of Customer, the voice of the customer. And the term gets thrown around even inside organizations. So again, something that's just general feedback is often referred to as VOC. I've seen my sales teams do it all the time. Hey, I got some VOC for you. And that's always the funniest thing. But the person widely regarded as having coined the term voice of the customer is Abby Griffin. You can look at, the positions that she holds, and especially her education. I mean, she's clearly a rock star. And she explored VOC as a component of QFD, and really emphasized how VOC drives new product development, right? All the way through kind of the early phase, all the way into production, and how collaboration and communication between various departments actually leads to more profitable and more successful products. So this is tied to decision-making and a number of different functions outside of marketing and sales. But again, Mr. Loomis, word on the street is you might know Abby Griffin.
Well, I do, and I asked her about the definition of voice of customer and if people are using it correctly or not. And she actually used an example really similar to what you just said, Aaron, about how people like a service tech or a salesperson, like gets some random information from a customer on call, like, oh, you need to do this, or whatever it is, and brings it back and says, yeah, we do VOC, and she said that's sort of the problem, is it's just sort of blown up, the term. But even her definition, I would argue, is still focused on product development, because that's where she came from.
Yep.
In a couple slides, you're going to see that Aaron, what he put together in terms of like a whole program. And I still think it's okay to use the term voice of customer as it applies to that whole program, as long as it's an intentional thing and not just totally random. But Abby says that her definition is this: voice of customers, learning about a customer's challenges in their entirety. She made a big point of saying that, in their entirety, and prioritizing them. That's important too. So they can be addressed through product improvements and innovation. Pretty simple, straightforward, but again, with intention.
Sure. So I guess I have a couple follow-up questions for you guys based on that definition. How do you prioritize like what insights you get? How do you sort of, because it sounds like it's a little bit rooted in subjectivity, because people may get more animated about certain aspects in an interview process, and then others, they may be a little bit more deadpan, but you may identify it internally as being something that your company is struggling with. So how do you prioritize the insights that you get during sort of this discovery process with your customers?
I mean, my personal opinion is that we diverge at first when we do voice of customer, to try and collect as much information as we can, and then we converge. And that can be a combination of qualitative and quantitative, which we're going to talk about in a second. But I think you can, basically the simplest answer is you can ask your customers to help you prioritize what they're seeing.
Yeah.
And they'll tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. And in addition to that, I mean, if it's say, nice transition. I mean, for example, if you're doing a qualitative study, then you'll probably start to pick up on themes after a certain number of interviews. Something will make itself kind of ridiculously obvious that it's a big problem, because everyone has said the same thing. But just to go through some of the collection methodologies, I think, I'm sure the audience is kind of aware that there's quantitative and qualitative research. The formats for quantitative are pretty straightforward, with the surveys and questionnaires and even experiments. So when you go quantitative, you end up with some empirical data, something that you can actually analyze. Whereas on the qualitative side, you learn more about latent needs and hope to gain those insights that Dave was talking about. From an advantage perspective, they're not polar opposites. You have objective conclusions on one side. You get more touchy-feely insights, is how I like to phrase them. You get more of a psychological understanding on the qualitative side as well. You get more context for why customers feel a certain way about a certain thing. And then you still get the benefit of getting some qualitative data in, or some quantitative data in qualitative research. From a disadvantage perspective, you might do a quantitative study and you learn something, but you don't really learn why. You don't get the why from the data. It's typically a little bit lower effort. From a financial perspective, it's a little more affordable, but the quality of what you get is heavily reliant on the structure of your survey or of your questionnaire. You have to make sure you're asking the right questions, and you have to make sure you're asking the right questions. They're formatted, they flow right, just so that you can kind of mitigate or remove some of the opportunity for error. On the qualitative side, subjective, right? It's more labor intensive. It can be expensive, and you're kind of heavily reliant on the perspective of the person that's doing the qualitative study. So kind of tying it back, the reason that there's the yin and the yang in the middle is because I'm a huge proponent of both. I think that they work really well together. You can uncover something in a qualitative study and validate some of those insights through a quantitative study. So it's not one size fits all. It's not one is better than the other. I think they work really well together, actually. Um, and I also feel that, anytime you're trying to learn something about your customer or a prospective customer,
Mhm.
VOC is definitely somewhere you want to go.
Dave, what do you want to add on this one?
Totally agree about the using both and the yin and yang. I'm also a big fan of not just mixing and matching, but multi-phase VOC, where why don't feel like you have to like boil the ocean with one project. Like, oh, we're going to find out everything in this one methodology or this one approach or this one wave. You could do a qualitative study and look into something, and then you realize, oh, okay, I've narrowed my search. Now we want to focus on this. And you could do more qualitative, deeper in that one area, or you could do some quantitative to back it up. I mean, I kind of always like to think, like, if I owned this company and it was my money that was on the line, to the decisions or that are going to come out of this work, what would I do to really answer the question? It's almost as simple as that. Like, we're trying to solve problems here. We're trying to understand our customers better. That's why we're doing this, so that we can be more effective in serving them.
Can I ask a little bit on doing a VOC program? I'm curious because I don't even know the answer to this question, but a lot of companies, people here listening to this, they try to break out their company by product category, by industry, or by like application. And I'm kind of curious, like when you're doing VOC, are you breaking it out in that finite a manner? Is it a higher level than that? How do you kind of organize the effort of doing voice of customer at a company? But I'd love to hear both of your guys' perspectives on how you organize kind of going after it.
Sure. I'll start. What I would say is, in fact, I literally just wrapped up a VOC study. And interesting, I just moved into the senior product manager role. I was a senior market segment manager 6 weeks ago. So when I started that effort, I wasn't really focused on product at all. I was trying to uncover just any pain points that existed at all, just as it related to our organizations interacting. So I did ask some product related questions because you wanted to like get a feel for the quality and like lead times and things like that. But I didn't, that study in and of itself wasn't really focused on product. So you can really learn how your customers feel about your organization as a whole with a VOC study, instead of just a product. In a past life, I would leverage a VOC study to make sure that the specs that I was laying out for a new product were in line with where the market was going and where the application needed those specs to be. So it really all depends on what it is you're trying to learn. And then you can kind of format it after that.
So agree with Aaron. And as far as different types of segmentation, my favorite way to think about it is application segmentation. That's sort of my go-to. And a different way to explain that is sort of a cluster of customers with similar needs. Now, those they could end up being geographically focused because they happen to be together, and that is because and their needs are similar. They could be a large, small customers. They could be a certain industry, and it just so happens that because they're in that industry, their needs are similar. But they could also be in the same industry if you're selling to them, or the same group seemingly, but because they use the product or service differently, their needs are going to come out differently. And by needs, I would say very specifically the outcomes that they're looking for. They're always using our product or service as a tool to get a job done. So look for patterns in people using our product or service in the same way to get a certain job done, and cluster those people together in VOC. And then you'll start hearing those similar things. And then you could start, responding to that accordingly.
Okay. So I wanted to circle back here to collection methodology, another thing I'm interested in. My feeling is that, and maybe I'm wrong to suggest this, is your line of questioning or the types of questions you ask from a quantitative to a qualitative methodology are different. And I'm wondering, Aaron or Dave, if you guys could break down the types of questions you would ask in a quantitative methodology versus a qualitative methodology, because I feel like you're going to ask different things because you're going to be looking for different insights as a result.
Yep. I mean, in a qualitative, I typically go with more open-ended, where I can just let them talk. Because and this slide is missing a couple things, and I actually see a typo in there that I'm pretty embarrassed about.
It's okay.
But,
You can see.
but honestly, my favorite part about qualitative studies are quotes. And I think quotes, because you don't have to filter them at all, you can literally disseminate them throughout the organization. So I'm way more open-ended. And then on the quantitative side, you're asking relatively close-ended questions that come with some type of value or selection from a list of options. So yeah, your questions are completely different. In a qualitative study, I just use a question guide. And in a lot of cases, I'll have, say, 5 to 7 questions I absolutely need answers to. Mm-hmm. And then I have a couple other ones that just steer the conversation. But, I like the qualitative just because you can just let the customer talk and you can learn a lot more about, what's going on in their minds versus, trying to pull values out of questions.
Yep, exactly. So my answer to the question would have been almost exactly the same as Aaron's. When I do qualitative, I start very, very open and very, very broad, just to hear what's going to come out first. Sure. So, Aaron's works in fire protection now. You get in front of customers and you really just honestly just ask, so what challenges are you having right now with fire protection? I know we talk to you all the time about this, or our sales or service are out, but maybe something we don't know about, maybe something that we've never talked about before. Oh, well, we are having this one thing. And then you probe and get more. Oh, okay, thanks. That's great to know. What else? What other challenges are you having? And you've got to be careful not to sell and not to solve in that meeting, because once you start selling something that you already have or trying to solve the problem with them, it's going to take a lot of time and it's going to divert from that conversation about the challenges that they're having.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that, like traps, right? There's a lot of traps that you can fall into doing something like this. And so you talked about trying to sell, and like leading the witness is another one where your line of questioning sort of like creates a predetermined answer. I wonder if there's other sort of traps that you guys would suggest for people here looking to do this to avoid, make sure we don't do this by any means necessary and avoid this kind of practice.
Yeah, there's tons. Honestly, it becomes a skill after a while. In the beginning, you're just trying your best, but then you start to learn what not to do. You have to really be comfortable with like quiet time, right? So like you can't be uncomfortable with there to be like kind of that awkward silence. You need to be okay with that. That takes time. That takes a lot of time to develop. Some of the other things that I've seen, actually, I would say the major thing that I've seen is I've seen organizations use VOC to validate a decision that's already been made.
Oh, okay. That's, yeah.
You don't want to do that because you're really not listening. You're kind of biased. You want to hear what you want to hear from those interviews. So I would not leverage VOC to validate a direction that we've already decided to take.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up that same trap about that Aaron mentioned about, waiting for the customer to answer. It's very tempted to fill in that silence and to help them to answer for them. But actually, if you wait, they're thinking and they're going to say something, and it's totally unpredictable what they're going to say. And that is usually when some of the best stuff comes out. So I think that's a really, really important one. The other one is mixing the input that you get from them together and not being specific enough with them to isolate an issue. So what I mean by that is that the job that they're doing, that how they're whatever their task is that they're having challenges with, that we help them with, it's divided into sub tasks, and they bring up a challenge. It's our job actually to really just to define what that problem is. And then we can go back and think about how we can help them fix it. But if it's a mix of all sorts of different kinds of problems, I'd rather have 10 problem statements than 2 or 3 that mix things together. Because when we end up having to engineer solutions, we want those things isolated because we're going to fix them. And that actually are the things that we'll end up potentially asking quantitative questions about, and the performance parameters around those different solutions that we'll get to eventually.
So Whitney just had a question. 2 pages of notes, Whitney. You are a monster. Thank you. Thank you so much for your furious note taking. I appreciate that so much. She did ask about one of her problems is just getting customers to talk to her in the first place. And so I'm curious about some methods that you guys use to make it just put skin in the game for your customer and get them to be invested in participating in a program like this. Aaron, I know you've done this at a really high level, and David, I'm sure you have as well. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys do to get the customer to talk to you in the first place?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's still a challenge for, I think, us all to find the right customers and get them to talk. So if you're trying to learn about your own customers, I think leveraging your sales force who already has a relationship is a really good way. It's an in-house liaison where they can introduce you. In fact, them bringing someone to their customer that's interested in their feedback actually usually ends up benefiting the relationship between that customer and the salesperson. What can be more difficult, it's actually one of the bullets here on the list, is what access do we have to our target respondents? If you go through distribution and you're trying to talk to end users, you can't always use your distribution to gain that access. So sometimes you might have to leverage a third party to do some kind of blind survey where they do all the recruiting for you. Because another challenge is if you circumvent your distribution and go straight to the end user, that could ruffle some feathers as well. So it's like, it's a fine line. I've thankfully, had pretty good success in terms of getting the customers that I was looking to speak to talk to me. But in fact, right now, the next phase of the VOC program that I'm in now is end users. and that has been considerably more difficult. So we know we have access to our distribution, no problem. But I'm probably getting like a 25% response rate from end users versus what I got from my own distribution. So it can be challenging.
So,
yeah,
okay, good.
I can just chime in here real quick. I mean, I think that we don't always have to make a big deal about this also. We don't have to use a lot of jargon and formal names for it. We don't even have to call it voice of customer. And if our own executives get scared about terminology like that, or we've never done it before, there was a question in the chat about that, like, you've never done VOC before and this is foreign to us and that kind of thing. It may be foreign to the customers that you're going to talk to also. I've had a lot of luck basically just getting customers interested because we want their insight and we value their opinion. There's a little ego involved when it comes to kind of stroking their ego, but I don't really think of it that way. It's not fake. It's actually, if you do it in a real way, because we do want their input and we do value it. And so, I usually use the term, I would really love your insight. We're actually working on some new enhancements or product development or services or whatever it is, and we would love your insight. Can you spare a little bit of your time? And then when you get into it, reiterate that. And then the best part about it is that if you really are asking open-ended questions and you're listening to them and you're probing back and you do it that way, then it's almost becomes their meeting, not your meeting. If you go in right off the bat with a long list of questions that are my questions, and you're helping me, that's how it feels. If you go in and you are really honestly curious and you honestly want to help your customer, that comes across and it ends up feeling like their meeting, like, oh my gosh, this is great,
Right. So Craig actually has the opposite end of that spectrum, and I want to bring Craig on, if you guys don't mind. This is like, I love bringing my attendees on if they want to. So Craig, I'm going to allow you to talk, and I want you to kind of talk with Aaron and Dave through your question, because I think it's an interesting challenge for people who want to try a voice of customer program. So Craig, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, Craig, go ahead. Go ahead and chime into these two with your question.
I mean, basically, what I had said to Matt, you guys might have seen it, was just that this topic in general is a tough one for me to kind of wrap my head around, because it's something that we've literally never done. I've been with the company for a really long time now, and so just figuring out even what we want to ask about or how it could help our company, because I would have to gain permission to speak to some of our end users. I've never spoken with our end users before, and so I'd have to gain that permission, and in order to gain that permission, I think I'd have to say what the benefit might be of doing something like this, and what I plan to do. And so just trying to kind of, it's so basic, it's the beginning, but just trying to kind of wrap my head around that is a tough.
Hey, Craig, does anybody at your company come in contact with end users now? It might not be you, but for any reason, either to sell a product, deliver a product, product or service, whatever. Is there any contact now?
Yes, our sales, we have a sales team who are in contact with end users.
Do they ever bring back feedback, like from their meetings, that don't necessarily have to do with the things that they're trying to sell?
I I haven't experienced that, but it maybe it isn't making it to its way to me, potentially.
Yeah, usually what happens is you don't hear about it unless it's like a big problem.
Right.
So like when somebody's upset in the field, then that's when you hear about it. So when you said you had to ask permission, who do you have to ask that permission to? Is it the sales team?
Probably the VP of sales, yeah, at the very least, and potentially the individual salesperson that would be handling that particular end user,
So
to find that,
just to give more context to Craig's question, this emanates from just him having to convince executive management that it's even worth trying in the first place, then even going back into getting the sales team to give you that access. Am I understanding that question correctly, Craig, or that concern?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of framing why it's beneficial. I mean, you can frame it from both sides. So you can, it's beneficial. It's always beneficial, more beneficial if you know more about your customers, 100%. And it also allows you to communicate what you learn throughout the organization. And again, I've had to frame it in the past as, when someone in the field brings someone from inside to talk to a customer to learn more about their needs, that only benefits the relationship. I don't think there's a ton of risk. What I would say, and this is probably one of the pitfalls that I forgot to mention earlier, as long as you don't go out making a bunch of promises while you're conducting VOC, then you should be just fine. And there's nothing malicious about it. You're just trying to learn about your customer so that you can deliver better value. They should appreciate that, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever developed new products, Craig, in your company or services?
Yeah, we do develop new products, but we sort of develop them kind of in a bubble. I feel like a lot of the time, at least, and they're good products. We end up with great products, but there's not a whole lot of focus groups or any focus groups really for that matter, but not a ton of customer input in the product development process. We kind of and many times are probably correct, but kind of think we know our industry very well, and we kind of know what people need, or we need to communicate why they need this product, and that's part of the marketing that we would have to do.
I did some VOC over the last few weeks, and I actually had a report out the other day with the CEO and the head of marketing. And I did what Aaron did was saying, which is I had a ton of verbatim comments. That's basically how I structured my whole report out. I bucketed all the verbatim comments into these themes. And this company had created all their marketing and communication and their sales around the fact that their technology was so good. And it really was so helpful and state of the art and all this kind of stuff. And I actually found out that the technology was table stakes. And that, yes, we do have good technology, but that the company's customers valued the relationships, literally the personal individual relationship and customer support. And the fact that there were these examples after examples of how they've gone, the extra mile. And as a result, like they had this trust and this in the information that was delivered. And so I came up with like this sort of this theme, this combination. It was about people, process, and results. And I kind of came up with this phrase: people who care, going above and beyond, delivering information you can trust. And it blew these people away at the company, including the CEO, because he's like, well, that's our values. That's all we teach. We hire on that. We tell everybody to do that, but we didn't know it made a difference. We never actually talked to our customers and heard from them that what we do is value. We just thought it was the technology that they were buying. And so it's like completely turned them around. And actually, this is like jumping way ahead to, the end of where we talk about communications, but it's actually going to be now incorporated in their communications, and they're going to change up everything in the way they talk in their sales. So it is so beneficial when done correctly.
Cool. Hope that was helpful for you, Craig. Thank you so much
Definitely.
for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, so we're on this slide right now. We danced around a little bit of this, but I want to get into, for you, Aaron, and for you, Dave, a lot of the people on this webinar, and Aaron, when you and I worked together at Binzel, we were a fairly small company, with a small sales team. And really the person who did voice of customer probably best for us was Etienne when he was doing fume extraction and developing the product off of that. But I'm curious about scale. So like for a lot of people here, they're not going to be able to have they don't have a huge amount of resources and can't bring a very expansive VOC program probably to fruition. So I'm wondering how big of a program can net you a tangible result that you can take action off of. And then just walk me a little bit through this slide in terms of choosing the best method for yourself.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, if you go back to Abby Griffin's paper, she said that 10 one-on-one 1 hour interviews can uncover 70% of important needs. And that by 18 interviews gets you 80%, and between 20 and 30 gets you 90%.
Really?
So you see that there's a point of diminishing return. It becomes less about how many people you talk to and much more about who it is you're talking to.
Can you clarify that a little bit between how many and who?
So 10 one-on-one 1 hour interviews results in 70% of important needs. Mm-hmm. And then once you get between 20 and 30, you've still only gained another 20%. So you're only at 90% of important needs. So at that point, it's like, all right, well, now you're just trying to find someone that has that unique perspective that'll stretch you to that the rest of the needs, because you've reached that point of diminishing return. So honestly, you can learn a ton about your customers by doing just a couple one-on-one interviews, as long as you have the time. So time can be a challenge. Also, in the most recent study that I did, we used a transcription service. So I recorded all the interviews. I always ask for permission first. I recorded all the interviews, got them transcribed, and then was able to go back through the transcripts and pull stuff out, because it allowed the conversation to flow kind of unimpeded. I wasn't having to pause and take a bunch of notes. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think, in terms of deciding how to scale the study itself, it hinges on also what it is you're planning to do with the output. So, for example, is if Tesla is going to invest $2 billion in a new product range, they probably want a fairly substantial study, just because whatever comes from that study is pretty vital. So it depends on what your capabilities are as well. Are you able to do the study yourself? Do you need to outsource it? What's your budget look like? And it all starts with, what are you trying to learn, though?
Gotcha. Anything added on that, Dave?
Well, the asterisks on that 10 interviews to me would be, as long as you're talking about like a cluster of customers with similar needs. Mm-hmm. So for instance, one of my customers makes concrete pump trucks that pump, concrete onto a job site, for foundations and things like that. So if I went out and did some customer interviews, and one of them was with somebody that does small residential homes. And then, with the concrete pump truck. And another one did apartment buildings. And another one did office buildings that were like, few stories high. And another one is working on like the Freedom Tower, in New York City, which, they actually did pump. Those are very different things and applications, and the needs might vary with that conversation. But if I went out to 3 or 4 pump truck customers that were just doing residential, I'd start hearing the same stuff. And I would be pretty confident that even though it was an hour-long conversation, I'm hearing echoes. In other words, that then I know I'm on the right track.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely found myself saying, yeah, I just heard that in my last interview.
Yeah, you love that. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
On the questions to gain clarity, Aaron, there's always a question, I think, of ownership, of who owns a voice of customer program. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to that, but I wanted to get both of your guys' opinion on, we're talking here a little more granular, like who conducts the study, who analyzes the results, but ultimately, where does ownership of the program lie?
That's a loaded one. And it's hard for me to answer because I've owned it everywhere that I've been, but I know that that's not necessarily true for every organization. My experience is that it's always been a component of marketing somehow, but that other functions within the organization conduct their own studies as well, right? So if aftermarket wants to add a service or finance wants to learn something about, how customers submit invoices or something like that, they could do their own study as well. Generally, typically with the help of marketing, but ownership, I would say, is probably more reliant on who's accountable for using that data to do something else, to use that information to do something else.
So that actually leads me to a question that Jeremy just asked. And so I'll read it off for you guys. Jeremy asked, what are the next steps after gathering info? Any specific examples that either of you have that they've taken or recommend after a VOC program, and then obviously the downstream impact of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on the data that you are collecting, whether it's all qualitative or quantitative. But you have to figure out a format to put it in that allows you to compare the answers, in sort of similar, buckets of questions or buckets of answers. So it's sometimes I call it like you sort of quantify the qualitative. In other words, if there's enough of it, you can say, 7 out of 10 people said X, directionally. And so that ends up giving you an indication, even though that it's quantitative terms, 70% said, X, even though you did a qualitative review. I'm very old-fashioned. I put a ton of stuff in Excel. I put verbatim comments as well as any actual quantitative data that I might be getting. I put it all in Excel, and I just work those files. And there are some actual VOC software programs. One's called New Product Blueprinting. Actually, software is called Blueprinter. And that's a methodology that I'm trained in, and they sell that, and you record the information on like sort of digital sticky notes, and there's a quantitative aspect to it as well. There's others as well. I've heard people getting some good traction out of Miro, MIRO, which is like online, whiteboards and things like that to brainstorm stuff. But there's all sorts of things that you can do. Aaron, what do you think about like processing the data?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people, if it started off as like a qualitative study and they have the transcripts and everything, I've seen people do like word clouds and see what popped up the most frequently. I think after you get through the analysis, I think a big step is to share the information. The worst thing you can do is just harbor all the information for yourself, because you'll walk around with an understanding that drives certain decisions and certain perspectives that other people in the organization may not understand because they don't know what you know. So to today's point, I think report outs are really good. I mean, if it's not organization wide, at least report outs to maybe your functional team or other functions that you come in contact with frequently. I think you definitely want to share the data. And then you also want to identify any actionable information that you took away. So in my recent study, like I said, I was just looking for any pain points at all. So I ended up with 15 buckets of needs. And there were some that were low-hanging fruit, stuff that we could take action on today. So you want to start to build a plan around what are you going to do to address some of the feedback that you got. If it was just like some product-specific feedback, and say you're still in the product definition development phase, then you can validate some of the assumptions you made. You can maybe make some tweaks to that product definition. But I think it goes analyze, share, take action. Those are probably the steps that I would recommend.
Cool. All right, let's hop here in the latent needs, because I think this is probably one of the greater benefits of voice of customer is getting to the root of needs customers have but aren't aware of because they don't even know a solution is feasible or even exists. Can you walk me a little bit through this, Aaron and Dave, and sort of what this is and sort of the value of it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so and I think there's a little bit of discussion around whether or not latent needs are a myth. Sure. I've seen some posts that are trying to debunk the fact that latent needs exist. But I mean, if you think about any little thing that's kind of a pain in the rear end that you found a workaround for, and you've become accustomed to that workaround, that's probably a latent need. If someone developed a product that no longer had you utilizing that workaround, then as long as it was priced right and easy to use and everything, you probably have a legitimate product, right? Because now I don't have to do all this extra stuff just to satisfy the need. If you're able to uncover latent needs, I mean, that list it tells you everything you need to know there. I mean, you're getting into an untapped market. You create an immediate competitive advantage. Latent needs often provide opportunities for innovation. And then think about it from a customer perspective. If someone developed a product that addressed a latent need for you, you feel like that company really knows you. Like they took the time to learn what's actually bothering you, right? So you get that customer intimacy play, right? It should, as long as you crunch the numbers appropriately, it should lead to financial gains, clear market share. And then if you're lucky, you can bump your head on all the stuff you need to bump your head on before the competition catches up and create some barriers to entry. And then those things feed the 7 Ps, as well as how you communicate, what your messaging is, what are your value props, and everything like that as well.
Anything you want to add on that, Dave? Yeah, I mean, I think also like the value of those latent needs are huge. Also defining like what is the latent need that you're going after, like actually uncovering it and finding it. Like I do work in the forklift industry. So an example would be, let's say that a few years ago, people didn't know that that they could even ask for a driverless forklift, right? That would have been a pipe dream several years ago. They exist now, robot forklifts, right? But but so under that definition, no product exists to satisfy them. So they didn't say like, I need a robot forklift. But if you're doing VOC correctly, one of the things you're uncovering is a desired outcome. You know, like if you draw a 4-box matrix, that's like importance and satisfaction, high, low, high, low. Okay. What you're looking for are, you know, desired outcomes that are in that high importance, but low current satisfaction. So in the forklift case, they might be, I want to reduce my operating costs, which means, you know, you could eliminate the driver, but I want to increase safety and efficiency in my warehouse. And actually the robot helps them get there. You know, so these are, it's really, really interesting and fascinating to try and find what are these latent needs? What are these unfulfilled, you know, sort of desired outcomes?
Very cool. Okay, so we got just a couple minutes left. And so I'm going to try to run through VOCs in the 7 Ps real quick. So real quick, 7 Ps: product, people, product, price, place, promotion, packaging, positioning. And yeah, your VOC can definitely impact all of that if you ask the right questions and have the right line of questioning to figure out. I know one of the things at Binzel we face all the time, Aaron, when I would talk to people, especially the distribution side of it, was how much our packaging sucked. People hated how we boxed up and sent out torches. They would come like smashed. There was also like never any like personal touch to it. So it was always interesting. I don't think we ever ended up taking action on it, but it's still interesting how you can touch all points of this. So in terms of positioning, I mean, what you're looking at really is, do you have product market fit primarily? You know, are you selling your product to the right market? Is it the right ideal customer profile? And are you looking at like the right kinds of customers? Like, it's really easy for companies to kind of get drunk on the idea of selling to an enterprise level customer, you know, like a John Deere or a Caterpillar, when they're probably better off going down to their tier suppliers who are smaller in nature because they're better able to service them, and focus on a customer of that size. In terms of the products, like what features and benefits are differentiating and actually matter. I always found that very interesting because I don't know, I'm going back to Binzel. I'm trying to think of an example here, Aaron. The fume extraction always kind of comes up as an example for me. Like we would think that, like one of the things that we found out that mattered a lot, that was a benefit that mattered, was the suction, and the static pressure on the vacuum systems was a huge selling point for our vacuum systems because they were way more powerful than others. And so it was a constant back and forth with the team in Europe, where it was not actually as much of a differentiating feature. And it because they welded at different parameters. And so it was fascinating to know what features and benefits mattered based on your market, and how you had to modify it basically for each market in order to differentiate itself. Place, you can always kind of figure this out, especially if you're trying to figure out what channels are going to work for you. You know, where's your market go to get answers? Who do they ask? What can you do to be there in some way, shape, or form? So one of the things I always like to do with customers is we would ask them, well, are there any YouTube channels that you watch or that you follow for professional development? Are you part of any professional groups or any sort of like, LinkedIn or Facebook groups or anything of that nature? And then also other things is, if you actually get the chance to visit a customer, which I know is difficult to do these days, but if you have a chance to kind of peek at their phone when they're just idly buying time, you can really get good insight as to what they do in their free time. Like, I actually have a customer or a client, and both of them are on Twitter all the time. And I'm like, you guys work in like the process piping industry. I would have never thought you guys would both be on Twitter, but inevitably it came up as a conversation and they both ended up being on it a lot. And I found that very fascinating. And then, what do we say in promotion? So this goes back to the verbatim point that you made, Dave, about using your customers' words to your advantage. I like to use it in my copy, in my website, in my collateral, in my sales deck. Like, you got to find a way to bring your customers' language everywhere across your website, especially in your main value proposition, which should be on the homepage of your website. And then
there's nothing. I don't mean to interrupt. There's nothing like watching a commercial where their key tagline is something that like makes no difference to you at all. Like, right. And it's like, yo, where did they get that from a messaging perspective. Like, I don't even care about that.
That's like so many companies that I see. God, I saw one yesterday and I can't even think of what they said, but I was like, this means nothing to me, and I actually could use that product. There's zero value proposition whatsoever. And then people who needs to know regarding a go-to-market strategy, sales, product engineering, customer service. A big missing component of VOC is customer service, which is ironic because customer is in the department, but they're too often, I think, left out of some of this stuff. Expectations, who do we utilize? So I like to figure that out for content, subject matter expertise, promotion, and what will I ask them? And then price, which is always a big thing for people. Do we market price? What's the most we can reasonably charge? Where the margins have to be? Packaging, which we had talked about as well. And then how we drive comms with VOC, to me, what it really helps shape is your narrative. Like Paul Kishi, who we both know, Dave, who was actually on a Clubhouse with us a couple of weeks ago, he is a strategic narrative master. And like, you can use your customer insights to really figure out where you stand in the market and what value you provide. We're working through this with a client right now who do end-of-line packaging for medical devices. And they're figuring out the big problems they solve. And so we've kind of narrowed it down into like, well, we solve the time problem, the scale problem, and the solution problem for these end-of-line medical device packaging people. And so we need to define that a little bit more, but like that kind of three-pronged approach is better than you trying to list all the 8 key differentiations and features that they have that, combine to make them unique. I'd rather keep it simple with that. Messaging, social proof, collateral, content, pretty self-explanatory. And so think of your market as like old game, new game. So what's the old game everyone else is playing, new game people need to know about? Where does that narrative show up? Use that common language across your org structure, which I think is very interesting. So one of the things when you kind of have that strategic narrative hammered out and voice of customer, allowing voice of customer to shape that, just making sure that that's a common language that's used from your executive team all the way down to your customer service. And I think that's super important and very powerful. The messaging should show up on your home pages, landing pages, social media, your advertising. So going and testing that messaging. When you get voice of customer, go test out on paid social with your content, see what resonates with people and what doesn't, and then go test new messaging after you kind of figure out what resonates and what doesn't. Social proof. I also like using voice of customer down the road to follow up for case studies, because when you interview people and you get good feedback from them, it makes that secondary ask to say, hey, I really enjoyed that conversation. We have a program right now where we're really trying to get more case studies, and you were very open about your experience with us. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share that same experience in a case study, even if it's anonymized. I love using voice of customer programs and customer interviews in general to be a warm intro for that. And then asking permission to use those quotes on the website or in collateral. It's really a great way to just be a relationship builder with your customer and just give them skin in the game.
Sure.
And then content, you can use this thematically across everything that you do: blogs, articles, PR, multimedia, webinars, podcasts. And then, as I said, sales presentations, hard collateral, messaging on your trade show booth, and giveaways and swag. I kind of rushed through that because I want to be cognizant of your guys' time. But do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
I literally am going from this meeting to a meeting with my client, and we're talking about how we're using VOC to in communication, the VOC results in all the things that you just went through. Like we're literally doing that in about 10 minutes. And,
all right.
And like we're also talking about the elevator speech, like how we're going to create something that people can remember a few key points, and they have permission to say it in their own way. But it's still capturing those 3 points from the customer, and it's said in a simple, authentic, non-jargony way. Like I had another client that we make like roofing materials, and they kept saying in new product development that they were coming up with a fantastic new polymeric alternative. The customers just call it like a roof membrane. It's like, hey, we've got an amazing new roof membrane that stands up to very severe hail. You don't need to get all technical about it.
Yeah, exactly.
You see effectively in sales to speak in your customer's language.
Yes, 100%. Mm-hmm.
For sure. And that's why, like, also it's super important not to translate what customers say into your own words,
Mhm.
because then you actually lose a lot of what it was they were trying to imply.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Don't paraphrase. Write it down exactly, or record it or whatever, and then use those words.
Right, because what they say is what other people in their industry say. Like they're peers, right? You're the market, right? Trying to sell to them. So like they will define the market for you on a way larger scale than you can try to do it yourself, probably with the resources that you have. All right, David, Aaron, thank you guys so much for your time. This was awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation in general. I want to thank all y'all for joining us. Again, for Industrial Marketing Live, I'm stunned people show up every 3 weeks to listen to me talk and my guests talk, but you guys keep showing up and I'm just endlessly appreciative of it. We did Google Ads, one of our first webinars, and I wanted to run back and do it again because we have more stuff on Google Ads that I wanted to touch base on. And so Aaron Weeks, who is our strategist at Gorilla 76, who is very, very good at Google Ads, going to walk us through a little bit on Google Ads strategy and tactics, and give you guys a framework, honestly, to get your Google Ads off the ground. If you've been struggling with Google Ads, have a high cost per acquisition, think you're wasting a lot of spend, or if you want to try it and have no idea how to carve out a framework, Aaron's going to walk you through that. And I'm going to help kind of steer that conversation. So guys, thank you so much for joining us for Industrial Marketing Live. You guys have a great rest of your week, and I will see you all this time again in 3 weeks. All right, Aaron, Dave,
Everybody.
thank you guys.
Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
See you.